La mayor parte de los habitantes del planeta se declaran creyentes. Esto debería provocar un diálogo entre las religiones. No debemos dejar de orar por él y colaborar con quienes piensan distinto.
Confío en Buda.
Creo en Dios.
Creo en Jesucristo.
Creo en Dios, Alá.
Muchos piensan distinto, sienten distinto, buscan a Dios o encuentran a Dios de diversa manera. En esta multitud, en este abanico de religiones, hay una sola certeza que tenemos para todos. Todos somos hijos de Dios.
Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor.
Confío en vos para difundir mi petición de este mes. Que el diálogo sincero entre hombres y mujeres de diversas religiones conlleve frutos de paz y justicia. Confío en tu oración.
500 criminal complaints have now been filed with Cologne police, all of them stemming from events on New Year's Eve near the city's main cathedral. Nearly half relate to sexual assault, and at least 2 involve rape.
Das ist ein Ereignis, was jeden Innenminister mitnimmt.
This is an incident which upsets every interior minister. I have thought a lot about these women, who had no protection and were degraded, at the mercy of these gangs of men. It has shocked and outraged me.
So far, he says, 19 people are under investigation. 14 are from Morocco and Algeria. Of the 19, 10 are said to be asylum seekers, while 9 others are believed to be in Germany illegally. As Europe's largest nation, Germany took in more than 1 million migrants last year. Revelations that some of them may have been involved in recent assaults prompted anti-migrants protests over the weekend.
Police told RT they haven't dealt with a crime like this until now.
The Federal Criminal Police Office is aware of a phenomenon of jointly committed sexual harassment of women in public, which is called Taharush Jamaya. Until now, this phenomenon had not been known in Germany.
Taharush Jamaya is an Arabic word to describe group harassment. The type of crime is usually committed by young men during mass gatherings such as festivals and demonstrations. Usually an inner circle attacks the victim while an outer circle distracts the onlookers.
Now the politicians are going to wake up. Now the people are going to demand from the government that they stop this crazy politics. We cannot tolerate this. We want our safe, equal countries where women can have a public life, and we will not give in to that. Well, if Europe means that our countries should be equal to men and to women, then they have to stop this Muslim invasion. Before we let them in, we have to find out who they are and what kind of people they are.
German justice ministers describe the rashest sexual assaults on New Year's Eve in Cologne as organised. Heiko Maas says the assaults must have been coordinated for large groups of men to commit such crimes. Speaking to local media, Maas added that the case will take on a new dimension if suspicions that the group had picked a specific date and crowd are approved. According to confidential police reports, some North Africans sent out calls using social networks for people to gather in Cologne on New Year's Eve.
Migrant assaults on women have shocked Europe, but it may not be as new as many people think. Sweden is dealing with a looming scandal, with police accused of covering up mass sexual harassment. Leaked reports suggest Swedish police investigated the sexual harassment of girls during a Stockholm music festival 2 years in a row, and most of the suspects were allegedly migrants. Here's how one of the young alleged victims explained what happened.
In 2014, I was there with 2 girlfriends. 3 or 4 men stood behind us and started to push against us. We tried to move somewhere else, but they followed. I was really disgusted by what has just happened.
Well, the Swedish police admit issues involving migrants are not always made public. There are concerns that Sweden's popular right-wing anti-immigration party could use such stories in its favour. It's also alleged that the music festival incidents were investigated by local journalists last year, but the story was dropped again, reportedly because of its sensitive nature.
Now all of a sudden we're facing the challenge that refugees are coming to Europe. And we're vulnerable, as we see, because we do not yet have the order, the control that we would like to have.
And she has a message for refugees.
And we know since the terrible events that night in Cologne that for integration we need the openness of the society. But the refugees also need to be willing to follow our rules and values as well.
A recent poll showed Merkel's popularity falling from 75% last April to around 58% now.
Australian authorities say Germany has been sending a growing number of refugees to its border with Austria every day since the start of the year. According to Austrian border police, the number of refugees being turned back from Germany has risen from 60 to 200 per day. Most of them either don't have valid documents or don't want to stay in Germany. Police say many of those turned back by Germany will try again to enter the country via other routes. Many European countries are struggling to stem the inflow of refugees. Last week, Sweden, one of the favored destinations, imposed controls on travelers from Denmark. It also introduced spot checks on arrivals from Germany. Over 1 million refugees entered Europe in 2015.
The European Union says the number of refugees entering Greece from Turkey is still too high, despite an agreement that was reached by the two sides to limit the flow. The first Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, said that between 2,000 and 3,000 people cross the agency every day to arrive at Greek islands. He said the 28-nation bloc is not satisfied with the results of Turkish efforts to curb the flow of refugees. He made the remarks after holding talks with Turkish officials in Ankara. The EU has pledged $3.3 billion and other concessions to Turkey in return for helping in curbing the refugees. Last month, Amnesty International slammed the EU for ignoring and encouraging serious human rights violations by engaging Turkey as a gatekeeper for Europe. Russia has once again accused Turkey of sending or supporting terrorist groups in Syria. A senior defense ministry official has said that the terrorists continue to receive reinforcements via Turkish territory. He added that assistance is regularly sent in through Syria's northeastern Latakia province. The official stressed that Turkey's actions run counter to international efforts to prevent help from escalating or reaching the territories. Moscow has already accused Turkey of involvement in the illegal smuggling of oil from territories held by Daesh in Syria and also from Iraq. Both Moscow and Ankara have been locked in a war of words since November 24, when Turkey downed a Russian bomber over the Syrian border.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin has criticized the expansion of NATO eastwards, saying the West made a mistake by forming a global missile system. Putin says following the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the then NATO Secretary General announced that the Western alliance would not expand its reach. But American and European officials acted exactly vice versa. According to the Russian president, NATO always claimed that its missile deployment in Eastern Europe is to address the so-called Iranian nuclear threat. However, even the nuclear deal with Iran could not stop NATO's anti-ballistic missile system from developing further, and the body has signed bilateral agreements with Turkey, Poland, and Spain. Putin added that NATO has already installed radars in Turkey and created a missile positioning area in Romania, all against Russia.
President Vladimir Putin says that the Western economic sanctions imposed against Russia over the crisis in Ukraine are harming the country. In an interview with the German daily newspaper Bild, the president noted that the sanctions have deprived Russia of international financial markets, adding that the country is suffering huge revenue losses in its oil and gas sector.
Putin also said Russia's oil-gas deficit had grown to a very dangerous point and had to be lowered. The Russian ruble tanked on the first day of trading after a 10-day holiday period as the price of oil continued to decline. The national currency dropped by nearly 2% half an hour into trading on Monday to 76.1 rubles against the US dollar at the Moscow Stock Exchange's first currency trading session this year.
12-year lows due to a global crude glut. New York's West Texas Intermediate and Europe's Brent North Sea crude for February delivery fell to just over $30.40 in early trade. The sliding prices have prompted oil-producing countries to call an emergency meeting of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC. The Nigerian Petroleum Resources Minister said that he expects the meeting to be held in early March. Emmanuel Ibe Kechikwu says that OPEC members had agreed to hold an emergency meeting if crude prices hit $35 per barrel. OPEC in its last meeting refused to cut production as members sought to protect their market share.
How cheap is oil? You'd have to go back to 2003 to see prices this low. The price of crude oil dropped this week to $31.41 a barrel, the lowest price for the commodity since December 2003. What was 2003 like? Well, the iPhone hadn't been invented yet, and R. Kelly's Ignition was top of the charts. While this is very good news for the gas pump, it could mean pain in other areas of the economy, including your job. Indeed, oil giant BP is just the latest oil company to announce job cuts. On Tuesday, the driller said it plans to cut 4,000 of its 24,000 jobs over the next 2 years. The cuts, which will focus on its oil and gas exploration business, could impact residents in half a dozen U.S. states, including Texas, Alaska, and Wyoming. There's also growing fear that the oil industry's pain will soon be felt on Wall Street in the form of rising loan defaults, which will hurt banks and bond investors. The reason oil prices are falling is a combination of oversupply and signs of slowing growth in places like China. The world is awash in oil, and new sources for crude have resulted in a gross oversupply. Add to that growing concerns that demand is slowing, and you have a lethal combination. This year, prices are down 16%. Last year was even worse, with the price of oil dropping 30%. The price of a barrel of oil is now 79% from the 20-year high of $145.29 in July 2008. In good news, the average price of a gallon of gasoline is now $1.95 and could go lower still.
Oil prices are falling every day. So far, anyway, in 2016. Here with expert analysis, we have Stephen Schwartz. He's the editor of the Schwartz Report, which provides daily insights on the energy markets. All right, Stephen, I need to talk to you now because, I mean, look at this. Despite all the trouble that we have going on in the world right now, all the trouble between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and yet we've got oil that continues to fall. Why?
Well, absolutely. And part of it is exactly what you point to about Saudi Arabia and Iran. Saudi Arabia and Iran are in a Cold War. They're not fighting one another on the battlefield. They're fighting one another at the gas pump. So right now, with the United States giving its imprimatur on the Iranian nuclear issue, the sense that the Saudis are squeezed. So these two countries are going to fight one another at the price pump. So therefore, where is the price growth now globally? It's in Asia. And of course, now the curtain's been pulled back on China. It's not exactly the communist economic powerhouse we all thought it was. You look at Japan, it's in its fifth recession since 2008. So Saudi Arabia and Iran are fighting each other for market share in a market that is clearly contracting, hence why you've got the pullback and the extent pullback in oil prices.
One of my constant questions.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad says Iran and Russia have a significant role in his country's fight against militants and Takfiri terrorists. Meeting with Iran's Interior Minister Abdulreza Rahmani Fazli in Damascus, Assad said that the Syrian army couldn't have achieved its victories in the fight against terrorism if it weren't for the support it received from Iran. He added that terrorist groups and their Western and regional allies are seeking to occupy and divide Syria. The Iranian minister, for his turn, called for boosting efforts in the fight against terrorism. He also regretted the fact that Saudi Arabia and certain other countries in the Middle East are colluding with the U.S. and Israel in their plots.
Codenamed Vilayat 94, the Navy drills are aimed at evaluating the capabilities and testing the military equipment of the Iranian Navy forces. The Vilayat drills have recently become an annual routine in which Iran tests different kinds of missiles, reconnaissance, and combat drones. It usually covers areas in the Strait of Hormuz, the Sea of Oman, the Northern Indian Ocean, and the Gulf of Aden.
Well, Iran's Parliament Speaker Ali Larijani has warned of reciprocal parliamentary action if the U.S. government does not stop the congressional bills against Iran. Larijani said that the 3 anti-Iranian bills recently approved by Congress are aimed at destroying the nuclear deal between Tehran and the P5+1 group. Larijani warned that if the U.S. doesn't change its approach, Iran would rethink both its defense and nuclear policy. He also rejected U.S. accusations against the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps. Larijani stated that the CIA is a terrorist organization which works hand in glove with terrorists in Iraq and Afghanistan.
The Russian president has accused the Western media of double standards, saying uncomfortable details about U.S. operations across the Middle East, well, they are hushed up. Let's cross live now to Auntie's Medina Kochner for more on what the Russian president had to say to Germany's Bild newspaper. So the Middle East and Syria at the forefront of the conversation, Medina.
Exactly. This is the final. This is the continuation of the first interview that was given by Vladimir Putin to a foreign media in 2016, and this time it was mostly focused on the Middle East region and, in particular, the situation in Syria. Now, here, Vladimir Putin accused the foreign media of being biased when reporting on military operations in the region.
American pilots hit the Doctors Without Borders hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan. By mistake, I'm sure. There were casualties and fatalities among civilians and doctors. Western media outlets have attempted to hush this up, to drop the subject, and have a very short memory span when it comes to such things. Who now remembers the wiped-out wedding parties? Over 100 people were killed with a single strike.
At least 10 people are dead this morning in a possible ISIS suicide bomb attack targeting tourists in Turkey. Police and ambulances rushed to the scene. The blast wounded 15 people. The explosion rocked an area of Istanbul popular with sightseers. Foreign visitors are reportedly among the victims. Charlie D'Agata is following developments from London. Charlie, good morning.
Good morning. Turkish officials are quoted as saying there's a high probability that ISIS is responsible for today's attack. It took place in a crowded square close to the historic Blue Mosque. The Turkish president said in the last few minutes it's likely the suicide bomber was Syrian and both foreigners and Turks were killed. A group of German tourists was in the square at the time, and government officials from both Germany and Norway confirmed its citizens are among the victims. Islamic State militants have been blamed for previous attacks in Turkey not long after that country joined the U.S.-led coalition in the fight against ISIS in Iraq and Syria.
Police say they are taking precautions against a possible second explosion in the area. And an anonymous official said that terrorist links are indeed suspected. Turkey's Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu has convened an emergency security meeting of key ministers and officials. The identities of those killed and hurt are so far unclear, but the deputy prime minister said most of the dead were foreigners. The Norwegian Foreign Ministry has confirmed one of its nationals was wounded and is now receiving medical treatment. Germany has warned its nationals to avoid tourist sites in Istanbul. A man who says he witnessed the blast described what he saw.
It was a suicide bomb, yes. I went there and saw it and came back to the hotel. There was chaos. Everybody was running somewhere. Policemen did not see this coming. They were sad, but at the same time, they were trying to evacuate the area because they said there was a possibility that a second bomb could go off. The square was completely evacuated.
A bombed-out building is all that stands after a series of attacks in Baghdad Monday that left at least 18 dead and 40 wounded. 7 people died when Islamic State militants detonated a car bomb outside a mall in a predominantly Shiite Muslim district. The gunmen then entered the mall and began shooting. At least 5 people were killed. The same attackers then exploded their suicide vests, killing 6 more. They had machine guns, this man said. Lots of elderly, women, and children were killed. New Baghdad has become an area of devastation. Bombings elsewhere in Iraq on Monday killed more than 24. Islamic State said they'd been targeting Shiites in the attacks. Monday's bombings left the biggest death toll in 3 months.
Following the DPRK's nuclear test of last week, Commander of U.S. forces in Korea, Curtis Scaparato, said he gave the order during a visit to the Osan Air Base. He was accompanied by the chairman of South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff, Lee Sun-ji. Lee said that his country's military would strike immediately if attacked. Meanwhile, South Korea's defense ministry says the U.S. and South Korea are in talks on deploying what they call strategic assets to the peninsula.
If enemies provoke us, strike at the target in immediate, accurate, and resolute way.
Seoul's foreign ministry says 4 representatives to the 6-party talks on denuclearizing the region will meet this week. South Korea's Kwang Jong-kook will hold a meeting with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts on Wednesday in Seoul. Wang will visit Beijing a day later to meet China's special representative Wu Dewei. The DPRK, South Korea, Japan, China, Russia, and the United States began the 6-party talks in 2003 to rid the Korean peninsula of nuclear weapons. They were suspended after Pyongyang tested nuclear devices in 2006 and 2009. Pyongyang had walked away from the negotiating table in 2008.
The U.S. says it has flown a B-52 over South Korea in a show of force following North Korea's recent nuclear test.
The United States remains steadfast in its commitment to the defense of the Republic of Korea and maintaining the stability on the Korean Peninsula, to include extended deterrence provided by our conventional forces and our nuclear umbrella. B-52 missions reinforce the U.S. commitment to the security of our allies and partners and demonstrate one of the many alliance capabilities available for the defense of the Republic of Korea.
B-52 is capable of delivering nuclear weapons. The U.S. military says the bomber was joined by its F-16 and South Korea's F-15 fighters. South Korean Defense Minister Han Min-koo has also toured the Army's Missile Command Center amid rising tensions with the North. Meanwhile, North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un has said that Pyongyang's recent hydrogen bomb test was a self-defensive act against a U.S. threat of nuclear war. Kim said that his country had a sovereign right to conduct the nuclear test without being criticized. North Korea has in numerous cases accused the United States of deploying nuclear weapons on the Korean peninsula. Washington, however, insists that it has no nukes stationed in South Korea.
Authorities in southwest Florida say power is still being restored after a tornado struck Cape Coral on Saturday evening. The twister did not hurt anyone. However, 135-mile-per-hour winds damaged homes and knocked down power lines, cutting electricity to thousands of people.
All the windows just started breaking and popping and exploding. It was just it was just unbelievable.
Cars flipped over, a boat flipped over on a car. I mean, there's roofs missing. There's pretty much trees just rooted right out of the down power lines. It's just a mess.
Authorities say the damage stretches over about 12 square miles. Governor Rick Scott toured the area on Sunday.
This is a pretty big area that went around, and you see these things like impaled in the drive. It's pretty scary. I mean, it broke all the windows, but if somebody had been outside, we had to have killed them.
To the north, wintry weather is hitting much of Ohio. Southern and central Ohio are expecting wind chills below zero on Tuesday and Wednesday. Some homes had lost power over the weekend, and some businesses were closed.
Came here to get some products for our Sunday school, refreshments, and the store is closed.
I came here to stop and get some gas and stuff like that, but since it's not open, I'll just have to keep moving and go to the next place.
Southern and central Ohio could get up to 2 inches of snow on Monday and Tuesday.
This act, which is clearly anti-Semitic act, this serious act, was committed against a teacher a few dozen meters from the school. The person attacked him violently. The victim is fortunately only slightly injured. We know this was an anti-Semitic act.
I feel very tired, and it's a very difficult situation. As you can imagine, it's something you can't conceive of, and it's very hard to deal with. I'm very shocked.
Merci.
At first he didn't understand what was happening to him. He didn't know why someone was doing this. Today he knows it was a terrorist act. He knows that he was assaulted because of his faith. That's something even harder for him to accept and understand, of course.
I chose to make Aliyah, immigrate, first of all, for my children, out of love of Israel, and because in France we aren't finding our place. The issue of anti-Semitism is also connected to our Aliyah. It's been coming for a long time, and now we've decided to take the big step. It's also due to the situation in France. We decided to start living in Israel.
Our
message to the Jews, if you have the opportunity, make Aliyah with joy. The goal spiritually is to get closer to the religion, and also to be part of the development of Israel in all directions. We have a child with special needs, and we didn't find any place for him in France, but here we found a place that accepted him warmly. I'm looking forward to a new life. It's still new, so it's hard to know what it'll be in long term, but I hope to acclimatize, to adapt, and to start a new life.
Aujourd'hui, c'est très difficile parce que notre vie, un tant soit peu religieuse, elle est
Now
basée
there is
sur
security in front of every Jewish school and synagogue in France, and there are fears all the time. No feeling that we can live freely. It's hard to go out. We're concerned about going out. The concern is primarily for the children, because of all the attacks that happened.
donc il y a de l'appréhension, ce qui est normal, on change de...
My family and I have a lot of motivation, great hope to adapt, and also concerns because it's starting a new life, but also great excitement.
d'espoir, donc et de motivation. Très bonne impression, très bonne impression, beaucoup de satisfaction.
It's great joy to arrive here, to come closer to people we know and family that already made Aliyah. We're expecting only good.
Oui, c'est vrai. Nous, on avait choisi Jérusalem, mais c'est vrai que pour l'intégration.
At the start, we thought of settling in Jerusalem, but here in Netanya, we can find lots of French speakers and even in the supermarket. Later, maybe we will move to Jerusalem, but for the sake of our absorption, it's better for us to start here in Netanya because there are French people every corner. We, of course, will learn Hebrew at the Ulpan. That's the most important thing for adapting.